The Advisory Committee to order. It is now 6 p.m. Thank you. I was going to say I'm not Mike. It's now 6 p.m. So we'll call this this Policy Advisory Committee to order, and we'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. So if everybody will join me, right hand over your heart, face the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay, Josh, if you'll take roll call, please.
Okay. Tim Carroll. Present. Ed Imsend.
Ed, are you on the line?
I'm on the telephone. Yes, I am.
Okay, we can just barely hear you.
Can you hear
Ed
me?
Imsend is on the phone. He is allowed to participate in the meeting, listening and talking, but he will not be allowed to vote as he is not calling in from a posted address and location on the minutes. However, he can participate other than voting.
Okay.
Go ahead.
All right.
I
Camille
want to
Anderson.
thank you very much, David, for allowing me to do that.
You're welcome, Ed.
Sorry about the short notice.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Camille Anderson.
Here.
Judy Decker.
Here.
Patricia Quist.
Here.
David Janet.
Here.
Joshua Nugent. Here. Renee Westalesk.
Here.
Nick Panzer.
Here.
Wes Katzenstein.
Here.
Lyle Fisher.
Here.
Don Zadiba.
Here.
John Kersey.
Here.
Tom Bakakis.
Here.
Was that right?
Close.
Okay. Close. And then Lorelei Oviatt.
Don't see Lorelei.
And we do have a quorum.
Thank you. Okay, with that, we'll move to, I'm sorry, I'll make that announcement later. We'll move to open public comment. Time reserved for public to address us about matters not otherwise on the agenda. No action can be taken on non-agenda items unless authorized by law. Comments are limited to 3 minutes per person. Looks like we have no comments from the public, so the next item on the agenda is to review and approve the minutes. And we have our meeting minutes before us from July, which is this June 27th rescheduled date for the 4th of July, and both August meetings, the August 1st meeting and the August 7th meeting, I think it was. So let's take them in order. Let's start with the June meeting minutes. Any comments or corrections?
I have correction to the June minutes. I want it added who's absent from the meetings, because these are public minutes. These are open to the public. The public doesn't have our roster. They're not going to know who didn't show up. I think it's important to have it listed, and that's the way the government agencies do it. And Lauren Duffy has given us a template to follow.
Sure, I can do that.
We need to have who was absent, and from my recollection, it was James Maurer, he hadn't resigned yet, Ray John Lagata, John Kersey, Nick Panzer, and Ryan Klausch. They were all absent from that meeting.
Okay. And I can do that to the other ones, too.
Other comments? Do we have a motion to approve those with the change made that Renee?
So moved.
Judy moved.
Second.
Who was that?
Lyle.
West? I'm sorry. Lyle? Can't see that far. Okay. All in favor? Aye.
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 Any opposed? Abstentions? One. Any recusals? I don't know why you'd recuse from minutes, but okay. All right, let's move. Motion passes. let's move to the July meeting minutes, which are dated, the date of our actual meeting, which was June 27th.
I have two corrections.
Okay, Renee?
To my recollection, the person that was absent was Lorelei Aviat, and at that time, John Alagata had resigned, and I believe James Mauer. Both had resigned. That should be in the minutes, too. Who is resigned?
Yeah, Raj was in process of being replaced. We don't have a replacement nomination for James yet.
And then my first name is misspelled under number 3. It has 2 N's instead of 1, and it's missing an E. It should be RENEE under number 3, where it says review and approve minutes.
You're not related to Michael Rennie?
No.
Okay.
Okay.
Any other corrections? We have a motion to approve the June 27th minutes with the corrections noted by Renee.
I so move.
I second.
The other Lyle? Okay, we have a motion, we have a second to approve the minutes as amended. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Recusals? Motion passes. Okay, let's go to August 1st. This was a 3-hour meeting.
Yeah, I have an addition. I handed out a handout under agenda item 5 that was not referenced or mentioned under that item. And I would like to see that mentioned in that portion of the minutes and appended to those minutes, or in some other way show up on the
website?
GA website. I have extra copies, Joss, if you,
If I could-
you have it.
Probably needed
If I could get an
I need it electronically so I can submit it. If I don't have it, I may. I don't know.
Okay, I will send them electronically to both of you.
Thanks, Nick.
Thank you.
And then I have a correction on the person's absent. I'm not sure. Well, I know for sure Lorelei Aviat wasn't at the August meeting. And I'm not sure if
She was, Lorelei.
she was at the August meeting?
She was.
The first August meeting.
We only have one August. Oh, yeah, there too.
Did she come in late?
I don't think so.
She may have. I can double, it's correct in the report.
Well,
We can double check the report. Well,
I didn't have time to go back and look at the video, but I don't see her name listed in the August ones.
She was here, so.
she was,
here at the August 7th meeting.
She was here at the August 1st one because I was in Colorado and she was here speaking and I was on the phone. I know
Okay,
she was
because
here.
you're listed as being here on August
you were here on
1st.
August 1st. The
And
August 7th was where you were on the phone,
Oh,
I think.
I was in Colorado on the 1st.
I think you were gone both.
Uh-huh, I
So-
was.
So this needs to be corrected. Pat Quist wasn't here on August 1st.
I'll go back and
Either date, actually.
I'll go back and double check.
I was in Colorado from the 29th or whatever, the night of the
Okay,
first.
we will check and
To
make
the
sure the
15th.
attendance is correct on
So-
this before we post it.
Who's on first?
Okay, because you have Patricia Quist as being here on August 1st, and I was not sure she was here. I didn't think she was.
We'll look at the note, at the report and the videos and confirm exactly who was in attendance for the for this meeting.
Okay,
And then
so
I'll add an absence.
that needs to,
section.
that needs to be corrected.
Any other corrections? Okay, do we have a motion to approve with noting Nick's amendment and Renee's amendments regarding the attendance correctly recorded?
I'll move for approval. Nick?
Second.
Lyle? You guys are trying your best to confuse me.
Who, Nick, they're both approving
you.
and seconding?
Okay, we have a motion, we have a second to approve as amended with 2 amendments. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions?
I have to, I wasn't
Pat?
actually legally here.
Yeah, Pat abstains. Any recusals? Oh, motion passes. Okay, let's go to the super long meeting. The special meeting on August 2nd.
7th.
I'm sorry, August 7th.
Yeah, I have a change. I believe that's the meeting at which I did my estimate of the current value of the water in the ground. And I mentioned I talked to a water hauler, I believe it was in Wyoming. I may, if I'm remembering the state correctly now, but I stated the reason that I went that far north. I wanted to get north of the Ogallala aquifer, which is tending to dry up. And so I didn't really say that Ogallala was dry and that they were hauling water. The particular water hauler I talked to was hauling water to Ogallala. Mainly I said Ogallala has a problem, therefore I went further north to find a contact.
That's out of the report, and that's my miscopying your statement. So thank you for correcting that.
Well, I'm sure I said it at least as clearly as I just spoke. So.
But I thought it was Lyle talking. Any other corrections?
Yeah, for the 7th, it should state that Patricia Quist was on speakerphone and she was not
allowed to
voting. That needs to be in the minutes. She was not a voting member at that meeting. And then absent was Thomas Bukauskas. Bukauskas. Okay. Sorry. Bukauskas.
I believe, try again. I believe that both Lyle Fisher and myself submitted written comments at that meeting that should be attached.
That's the special meeting, right?
Yeah.
I believe
Okay.
so.
Yeah, I did, yes. Okay, I did.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
We'll get that on there.
okay.
Any other corrections or
Yeah.
additions?
I have one regarding what Lorelei Aviat agreed to do to help get the records accurate, because we need to hold her to this. She actually agreed to look at the public health records of Kern County and cross-reference and coordinate with San Bernardino County and Inyo County's addresses as well to get as accurate a list of well owners. That her approach was to go through the health department of the county to get those addresses.
Can you write that one sentence up and give it to Josh?
Could I email you?
Yeah, that'd be
Yeah.
great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, any other corrections or additions? Okay, we have 4 proposed amendments to this. Wes' comment on to exclude the words about the Ogallala Basin and talk north of there, which is in fact a 7 statewide basin that is going dry and water hauling throughout it already. The second one was the enclosures attachments from Judy and Lyle. Third one was to correct and note Pat was not voting. She was on by teleconference and Tom was absent. And the fourth one, Renee just noted about Lorelei's commitment for county records at the meeting. So do we have a motion to approve the minutes as amended?
I so moved to approve the August 7th
So Judy,
meeting minutes as amended.
okay, Judy.
And I'd second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions?
Me. Quist.
Right. Any recusals? Motion passes. Okay. Let's go to the meat of our agenda for tonight, and mostly it's items that we are going to have on review for individual comment, and I'll talk as I introduce them specifically about what our dates are for review on this as I give the GSP schedule update for Stetson. Jeff Helsley would have been on the line with us tonight, and Heather and Steve Johnson, the water resource manager, and Heather, who works for him, if they're back, if they make it back down south to the LA region, they're going to try to call in to help answer some questions on some of these items if they come up. Jeff Helsley is not able to be here because he didn't feel very well on Monday. Yesterday early, he felt much worse and ended up having emergency appendectomy. And he's still in the hospital today. The last word we had was he was okay, that everything went well. He unfortunately did spend 10 hours in the emergency room. Jeff, if you're watching, get well quick. Get back to the wars. We need you, the water wars, in terms of producing products, because the schedule that I'm about to announce that Stetson committed to today is ambitious, and it's going to make us work hard too. We did receive in the mail earlier this week by email, all of us, the latest Section 2 draft comments of the GSP itself. And we're free to make comments on those today when we get to that item on the agenda. However, our process is if they arrive prior or after posting deadline for the public meeting, we provide individual comments to me that will go back to Stetson at the next meeting where we review. Everyone will have a copy of each other's, and everyone on this committee will be able to see what the others have said, and we'll talk and see if there's any consensus that we have as a group about them, as well as we may have the next session or section to review, and I'll talk a moment about that. We're also going to review a presentation that came this morning on sustainable management criteria. We did have the shallow well impact one early, and that was available at the last GA meeting itself. The sustainable management criteria briefing was new this morning, and the projects and management action items were new this morning, and Stetson is looking for input individually, just like we do on the GSP chapters, back to them by next Friday on those two sections, because they are they are parts of the GSP that is in writing. So the 17th for Section 2, and I'll remind us when we get to that, and the 12th, I think it is, next Friday, 13th. Is it Friday the 13th next week? Ooh, Friday the 13th. Our comments are due Friday the 13th on those two. That's sustainable management criteria and the projects and management actions. Those are both chapters in the GSP. Stetson committed that they expected to have the entire draft GSP for internal staff review complete by the end of October. It would then go to the staff, the lawyers, and then it would come to us and the TAC for our comments and inputs prior to going to the board formally. So that is the schedule that they've committed to. I know they're writing heavily, and I know that it cost them to have Jeff sitting in the hospital the last 2 days, not able to help. At one point, they were hoping he would be out soon enough to get on the phone with us tonight, which I thought was a little bit excessive, but he's that kind of guy too. So with that, that's the schedule we have before us. We're going to have individual review of the draft GSP Section 2 release, which is item D. We'll then have the individual review also for sustainable management criteria and projects and management actions, both due by Friday the 13th to me for forwarding to Stetson. So with that, that's the GSP schedule update. Does anybody have any questions or comments on that before we get into those individual items?
Wait, I have one question. The sustainable management criteria, was that emailed to us this morning?
Yes.
Okay. Do you know what the other one was that was emailed to us this morning?
Yeah, it was also the projects and management actions. I emailed them as soon as I got them this morning.
So when are the projects and management ones due?
Same time, 13th.
All three, Chapter 2 and sustainable?
No, Chapter 2 is the 17th.
Oh, September 17th?
Correct. And I will remind us as we go through each one of these when our individual comments are due. They will come back collectively for full review with our individual comments back to us next month. So they're trying to make sure that the PAC and the TAC both have adequate time and review comments put in and inserted before it goes to the GA itself. Okay,
So I have a question. Since the time is so short on this, and you say they're going to send us back all the individual comments, are we then going to have these two items on our agenda in October so that we can collectively discuss it?
yeah,
Okay.
that's what I just said. We would all have it, and we'll talk about it as well as anything we knew we have
Right.
before the public posting deadline. If it comes after the posting public deadline, then we have the individual comment process again. They're putting them out as fast as they come up. We expect to have some of these out, some additional ones next week, by the way, which would put them in full review to share our comments at the next meeting on the next round of these. Okay?
Dave, I just want to make sure I heard you correctly. It's my understanding then that Stetson is now committed to having the first complete draft of a GSP to staff
To staff
by
the
October
end of,
31.
He said the end of October, so I didn't say October 31st.
Okay, the end of October. I just want to make sure I heard that right. So we won't see any, well, I won't say anybody in this room, we won't see any of that until after the end of October, whatever that is.
No, we're seeing them now. We've already done one chapter. We have a second chapter we're doing today. We're going to see them incrementally as they release them. The last one, they will all be complete by the end of October. Some of them will have already gone through us. Some we will just have seen after they're released from the staff review.
But Stetson's first complete pass at this, including their executive summary, is not now expected until the end of October. That's what I just want to make sure I understand that clearly. The first complete, final
Right.
draft.
And there will be, and the implication is there will be the last couple in there we will probably have not had the review of yet. But they committed to us reviewing them before the complete package with everyone's comments taken into consideration are passed to the board. That's what Steve Johnson too committed to today.
I have a comment in that regard, and I would like it passed on, actually, to Stetson. We have reviewed at this point 2 sections. We have never seen a corrected copy of those sections to see if the comments and the concerns that we and the TAC had have been addressed.
We've seen one of them, maybe 2. We did get them back and review the first one with the comments included.
Maybe it was before I was on this board, because I don't remember that. I do remember that the first section in particular was not well written and had lots of grammatical and spelling errors in it as well.
I think, well, we got the inputs and corrections back. We did get them included. We made additional comments, and I think that also happened for the next section up.
Okay, I thought I understood this, but now you both got me confused now. Stetson said he will have, Steve Johnson said that he would have an initial draft of the whole GSP done by the end of October. But then he went on and said that would be for internal review and lawyer review, and I'm not sure when we would get to see it.
Right after that is what he said
When,
to me.
yeah, when would that be, though? Are we
As fast
talking
as
a
the-
week or 2 weeks, or
As-
that'll be after the end of October?
As
sometime?
fast as the staff and the lawyers can get through it. I mean, everybody knows what the deadline is.
Yeah,
And I spoke to him separately after the meeting, just to
Okay.
clarify this and have it clear in my mind
Yeah,
so that I could
okay.
relate it.
Okay.
And they know that is the task, that is the task and the timeline, and they want to get it done quick. That's why they're releasing it incrementally also. We will have seen most of it before that point.
Yeah, okay.
We might not have seen the second review of some of them
Right, yeah,
just before that.
yeah, okay, okay, that's.
We'll be pushing it.
We're close, yeah, oh, yeah.
They are still committing to having it complete and out to the public so that we make the January 31st deadline for the entire thing approved by the GA itself. That was also a commitment he made today. Any other questions on the schedule now that I've confused everybody?
I have a question on the process to
Go ahead.
give the comments. We forward our comments directly to you, then you forward them on to Stetson?
Right.
Okay.
Right. They incorporate them or take them into consideration. They bring it back to us with the PAC comments and the TAC comments. They got their sections the same time we did this week. And we will get the next sections, they thought, late next week. That may in fact be the project and management action sections. And I think the week after was when they were shooting for sustainable management criteria, but we'll see. We'll see. Some of it's going to depend on when Jeff's able to get back to work. Okay. With that, we'll go to the sustainable management criteria. And Gary, can you put up the shallow well impacts brief, the first one? Is there a clicker on the podium, Lyle?
It's up.
Do we have the clicker out here, or do you have it? Okay, thank you, Don. Okay, this presentation was actually released at the Groundwater Authority meeting last month itself, after the week after our second August PAC meeting. And all it does is capture the entire thing. It's for the public's benefit. Most people have seen it. It was briefed today and also at the TAC. It adds scenario 6 and then does a recap with the others. Gene Moran conducts this after each model run. There's a separate assessment and modeling done that is not, it's based on the model, but it is a different methodology that was approved by the TAC to develop the shallow well impact for each of the scenarios that were run. And this describes the scenario 6 that we went through in great length at 2 meetings in August, and what the actions were and how they were implemented, the differences between 4.5 and 6.1 and 6.2. And here are the cumulative results of 3, 4, and 5. 3 was the white paper. 4 was originally the Water for Peace. 5 was it was immediate halt to pumping, and sometimes colloquially called the nuclear option. 6.1 and 6.2 were variations on number 4. 6.1 had additional imported water that was put in to try to see if there would be any effect with regards to addressing the evapotranspiration on the playa. There wasn't. Didn't show that additional water made any real significant impact, and therefore 6.2 was more likely the representative scenario that could be considered in the model group to work around. So these are the cumulative well impacts predicted to go dry. This did not include a water quality assessment at that time. The evapotranspiration models are still being worked. They are supposed to be available at the end of next week for these scenarios. So you see the differences between the shallow wells that go dry after the scenario starts Over there for number 3, it was 73 cumulative. The in between one, number 4, was 36. The route 5, the immediate halt to pumping, still showed 15 going dry in the time period before it was implemented under the GSP. And 6.1 and 6.2 at this point showed 22 each. So that's the summary of the shallow well impact study that supported what all we saw at the last 2 meetings. We did not have at those 2 meetings the numbers for scenario 6.1 and 6.2. What came out at the TAC today was a request for 6.2 in particular, which is the one that they were basing most of the decisions on today, or the discussions surrounding it today, was identifying the factors that had changed between scenario 4, which 6.1 was modeled around, with modifications of where additional pumping went and other pumping was stopped or lessened. What were the factors, all the many factors that went into the difference between 36 and 22? Was it location of pumping? Was it overall levels? Where was it? What effects did we see? How did that dramatic difference or that significant difference show up there? So Stetson took an action to go over that out of the TAC, and I think that was important for us to know. Any comments or questions from the committee on the shallow well impact study?
Yes, I have written a paper which the committee members should all have a copy of. I have a few extra. I'm not going to read the whole thing. It has a lot of comments in it. I find that the way that we are receiving the information that we are supposed to review, it's not good. It's too piecemeal, and it's hard to do justification to an evaluation of it, I think. I don't know what anybody else thinks. And it is not the same as what was presented at the August meeting. Slide 2 and slide 3 are different. And I brought that up today to Heather at the TAC because they are different. They offer different consequences and conclusions. And I feel like this, I realize time is short. It's not the committee's fault that the time is short. But I think, as I say somewhere in my paper, the devil is in the details. And if you don't get the details right in the beginning, you're going to have a faulty conclusion. Anybody who's taken any math classes knows that's so. I would like to go over some of the things that I have written down. One of the, you did not, I thought you were going to go over these slide by slide, but you didn't. The first bullet in slide 2, under objectives, talks about the highest and best beneficial use. Those are lofty words. I'd like to know who is going to decide this issue. Who is going to decide what water user has the highest and best beneficial use? You have Sigma, which was created by the legislature, that tells us that we are an overdrafted basin and we need to develop a sustainability plan. I totally agree with that. It should have been done a long time ago. But we have the county who, and they're no different than any other county in this state, who has, over the years, issued building permits and well permits, and they've issued well permits for commercial agriculture. The commercial agriculture has a right under the water code to use their water for overlying rights. Who is going to decide whether Pat, who's sitting next to me, who grows pistachios, has a more important right than I do, who have a well that is used for domestic purposes only? I think this is the crux of the whole problem here myself. And it concerns me because I believe the board is trying very diligently to not create a situation where there will be a lawsuit, and I can understand that perfectly, but I don't see how it's not going to happen when we have things like highest beneficial use in documents. That's one thing. I'm not going to go through all this, David. I would like you to pass this on to Steve Johnson and Heather. If any of you have any questions about what I wrote, I'd be more than happy to answer them. I picked on it, and I picked on it on purpose because I thought that it had things that needed to be corrected. The third slide has, it's divided different users into different categories, and the two categories are domestic and non-domestic. This was brought up earlier today at the TAC meeting. I do not feel that the Navy, nor the city, nor the county should be categorized as domestic. I think that, and this was brought up also, that the de minimis user needs to be a category by themselves.
Ed, if that's you, can you go on mute, please?
Or bring the
We
ice cream.
turned it off. I'm so sorry.
Thank you.
Stetson is in a really bad place because time is running out. But if we say the wrong things, or rather write them, we're going to get the wrong results. And I think this is a big concern that we need to address.
Okay, it'll be in the report, and
Thank
if
you.
send me the attachment electronically, we'll get it to them as you requested.
I will do so.
Thank you.
Dave, I'd like to agree with what Judy has just said. She's got some really good points here. I was going to talk more about mitigation, and I don't think that's appropriate at this time. I've got some stuff written.
Okay, we'll get to there.
We'll get that later. So,
Okay, Josh, were you going to comment?
Yeah, I just real quick wanted to point out the difference between 6.1 and 6.2 was, I believe, about 2,500 acre-feet a year used to offset the recharge or the discharge, I guess, from the playa. And that was from 2035 to 2070. So that's about 87,500 acre-feet, which is about 150% of the ag pool. And I think it's interesting to note that the difference between 6.1 and 6.2 is there's no difference on the number of shallow wells impacted. So you can have a difference of 90,000 acre-feet. And I understand that there's a time and a spatial component to when that water is extracted that's an important, reason why it looks like that. But I would just, like to state that, 90,000 acre-feet's double what the ag pool is, or 150% of what the ag pool is, and yet you can see that can be put in or out of the model without any significant impact on the number of wells that go dry. So again, I just think that points out we have a spatial and a temporal problem with water, and perhaps you can use Brackish or the El Paso Robbers Roost area to get you as the bridge to help offset the temporal and spatial issues that I think are really the problem. It's as much as that we don't have enough water, is that the water's not available at the right space and the right time. So maybe we can use imported brackish and distributed pumping to help offset some of the issues. So, thanks.
Thanks. Any other comments?
I have a comment. Just to clarify, I agree with Josh. I had the question about the multiple variables on Model 6, and the three that I want to see ranked according to their impact on the shallow well failure are the lower overall pumping, the injection of imported water near Inyakern, and then moving some of the pumping from the dense pumping areas to the lower density pumping.
Yeah, and that's what they agreed to at the TAC, correct?
They said they would look into it.
Okay. Yeah, I understood Steve to say that they would actually develop something on that, information on it. But we'll make, we're requesting it now, so we'll make sure that goes in.
It is.
The clarification.
Right.
It's also
Thank you.
very important too, which we will get, I guess, next week, or at least the TAC will get, the issue of non-potable saline water. If you look at the studies that have been done, for instance, the Bureau of Reclamation study drilled 10 wells. All of those wells, except well 4, have multiple posimeters and went down to 2,000 feet. Every one of them, no matter where they are in the valley, show the deeper you go, the tighter the formation, and the poorer the quality of water. And so in scenario 6, it calls for pumping for a considerable length of time, and we are going to have to examine the issue of non-potable water being treated and used for potable water, I'm sure.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Yes, Wes here. Yeah, I concur with Judy's general comments that we need to be precise in our language throughout the process, or it can get us in trouble later. And I'd like to mention, too, on the beneficial use, I believe when the concepts for scenario 6 were presented, the word reasonable was used as well. And that's in the state constitution, that water shall be used reasonably. And so I suspect that there is a logic that exists within the Groundwater Authority when these scenarios were discussed, and it probably also involves reasonable use of water as well as beneficial, and it would be nice to know what that logic is.
Thanks.
Excuse me. I also bring up in my paper the issue of growth, because I can't remember if it's slide 2 or slide 3, talks about a 1% growth over time for the water district. This 1% growth should also be allowed for other entities that serve the public, the Inyokern CSD, the mutuals and co-ops that are in this valley, if we're going to have a 1% growth. But I'll point out also that this 1% growth, which will need water, will be taking our water, the water of the people that already live here, work here, and use the water. And that needs to be considered.
Any other comments? Public comments? Oh, I'm sorry, Pat, go ahead.
Just that I happen to agree with Judy. If you're going to have 1% growth, it's going to be throughout the valley. And the people who've been here the longest will see that impact happen to them. So
Okay,
it needs to
public
be
comment?
considered.
Hello, good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the PAC. Derek Hoffman, attorney from Meadowbrook. Just a comment as we're looking at this slide and this summary of Model Scenario 6.2. I just want to remind you that about Model 6.2 and what it really is saying, and recall that creates two groups, a non-domestic, so-called non-domestic, and a so-called domestic group. And that non-domestic group represents collectively tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars of business value and investment in this basin. And in order to protect, it would wipe out essentially that group. I mean, it puts an expiration date on all of that production. And it does so in order to protect somewhere between 20 and 30 shallow wells. That's the impact we're talking about here. So what's not included in Model 6 is an explanation of the impact on the non-domestic group and an impact resulting from what happens when you put a temporary allocation to that group. And I just want to point that out. And we see this cumulative well impact analysis here, these numbers. I'd also mention and remind you that we don't know where those wells are located in the basin. We don't have any data as to those actual wells. I mean, we're talking about making decisions that have very severe consequences for this so-called non-domestic group, all to preserve some unidentified, unlocated, small group of shallow wells that could probably be mitigated in some other way. So I just want to remind you of that. I don't consider that to be reasonable, and I think we ought to be looking at alternative approaches that are more considerate of all the users in the basin. Thank you.
Thank you, Derek.
Don Decker. I'm a member of the TAC. One of the problems, Judy brought it up in her discussion earlier, one of the problems that is leading to a certain level of confusion is, in fact, this piece-by-piece submission, creation and then submission of the various pieces and parts of the GSP. What is missing is basically the philosophy, the actual content, the justifications for the assumptions that have gone into the project to this point. Steve Johnson at various times has given us orally, and today was an example, given us maybe a half an hour worth of discussion of that exact topic. But it's not written down, and of course it has evolved and changed. And we're not trying to say that we're going to have this basic starting point necessarily fixed in time and space, but here we are approaching the end of the project time, and we still do not have even a one-page list of the assumptions that have gone into the creation of these scenarios and the analysis that goes on afterward. There, bits and pieces are scattered around, but it is not coherent. And that's one reason why there are conflicts that show up, peculiarities. The division of the pumpers into just two categories is a mistake. It results in various of the pumpers being miscategorized, and it misses the opportunity to understand what the real differences are. And it was done as a convenience. It wasn't done because that was a good idea. I'm just telling you discussion that I carried forth earlier today. As far as the well impacts and the shallow well impacts, the model that Gene Moran is using does have specific locations in a sense, because the impacts are occurring as a result of high rates of decline of water levels, and we know exactly where those are. Most of these failures are either in North Brown Road or in the southwest. So, the model, the impact model, is intended to be a guide to the to the impacts that the declining water has got on our community. But it's not the only way to derive that impact. The work that's yet to come, looking at minimum thresholds and trying to actually define what we're aiming at, it's very late in coming. It should have been done, in my opinion, much earlier. And here we are, however. We can't obviously go back. But I've been, and others have been hammering on that almost from day one. We've kind of gotten the process turned around. The reason we've been doing scenario runs is to try to get a better understanding, and I think for the board to get a better understanding of what we're really up against. And the scenarios absolutely did that. There's no question that they had value there, but as far as then trying to bridge from there to the GSP, it's a big jump.
Thank you, Don.
Good evening. Could I ask a question? And I don't know if anybody here can answer it since we don't have a Stetson representative here. The note on the bottom, it says historically between 1984 and 1918, 2018, an estimated 91 shallow wells were impacted. By impacted, are we meaning that they went dry? Did I hear somebody say, mm-hmm?
I think Stetson, we can't answer that specifically, but I think Stetson has said yes. Don, does the TAC have that information presented to them? This question's been asked before.
The shallow well impact is in the model is defined by that point where the water level has dropped to the top of the perfs in the well. The well is not dry, but at that point it is severely impacted, and its end of life is short. The duration left is short before you actually do have well failure. No one, unless they absolutely don't have any money or they don't know what they're doing, no one lets their well completely dry out. That is not what happens. But the well will basically practically cease to function. When the water level is at the top of the perfs, the casing deterioration accelerates greatly, oxidation. You tend to pump a lot more particulates, sand pumping, and you're on the downward spiral to the point where your pump is worn out and your well is so sick it's time to drill another. That's what the impact actually means.
Thank you, Don. That being said, do we have an average age of the 91 wells that have been impacted?
You'd have to ask Stetson.
So some of these wells could be, pardon?
I can tell you mine, I know that. Because this is what Don just described is exactly what happened to my well.
Okay.
The water table declined below where the perforation started, and having a steel casing, it started rusting big time. And I plugged up a brand new submersible pump in about 3 years with rust.
I guess the point I'm trying to make is that wells, just like automobiles and air conditioners and refrigerators, all have a useful life.
Now, the life would have been longer if the water table had not been declining at 2 feet a year or 1.5 feet a year. So my well would still be viable.
I understand what you're saying, Lyle. And I'm not here to argue that point. I'm just here to say that wells, like everything else, has a useful life. And if some of these 91 wells were drilled in the 40s or 50s, they had probably reached the end of their useful life, having nothing to do with the groundwater table. Thank you.
Thank you, Elaine.
I can answer that concern if you want me to.
Briefly. It's a tack question, really.
I'm a TAC guy.
I know, but this isn't an attack meeting. Go
Yes,
ahead
except
quickly.
that this has a strong overlap onto your territory. The wells that are in this list are they're failing because of declining water level. They are not aging out. That's not what this table shows. There are wells that, in fact, do age out, but they are not included. Was that short enough?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other public comment? Okay, let's move on to,
I have a comment.
Go ahead, Wes.
Mr. Hoffman's comment, unfortunately, he's left the room. But I think when we talk about the number of shallow wells that fail, we're not claiming that we're trying to claim those wells are worth as much as the agricultural investment, either in jobs or livelihoods. These are more minimum thresholds that are being set as required by SGMA. If you want to compare investments, you need to ask yourself the amount of water that would be used and investment in infrastructure that Mr. Hoffman's talking about. If that amount of water is pulled out of the community at large, what amount of infrastructure and how many livelihoods will be threatened or lost by that amount of water? And I think you're going to find that the investment in the number of jobs that are lost by a non-agricultural use of water is going to be huge compared to the numbers that Mr. Hoffman quoted. So I think we should keep that straight. If we water, we need to ask how efficient water is, how efficient in terms of how many livelihoods and how much existing infrastructure, each gallon pumped or each acre foot pumped, how much infrastructure and how many livelihoods are supported by that amount of water. And I think that's the number we should consider when we talk about investments, and we should include livelihoods.
Thanks, Wes.
Can I also make a comment? So, along the same lines, Mr. Hoffman brought up really, I think, two policy issues for us. And he didn't say they were policy issues, but he brought them up. And the first is, this issue of new business or new people coming in and want to use the water. How are the rest of the users going to get compensated? And I think a typical answer is impact fees, or you have to have some off-site mitigation. Bring a water right from somewhere. You have to do something so that you can be welcome into the community of sorts. That's a policy issue right there. And then, as Judy mentioned, highest and best use. Mr. Hoffman alluded to agriculture as being highest and best use because of its dollar investment and its productivity. However, that's also a policy question for this board, is the quality of life of the people who live here, the many, as I think it was West that just mentioned that. If you take an acre of alfalfa out of production, how many new people can move into the area and live? I'm not here to make a value judgment for you, but I just want to say that, to me, that I recognize that as a policy issue that was brought to us just now.
Agreed.
May I make a comment?
Yes, Pat.
In the area that I happen to be in, and I really don't want Judy's well to go dry, so we'll just feel like I say that. There is a Water District well. There is a Cyril's Valley well. There's multiple other individual wells. And the Water District is a purveyor, can drill pretty much wherever they own property and pipe it wherever it needs to go. No problem there. When you make comments, I just want to ask you to be careful, because the Water District is sending water to multiple businesses throughout the valley. that they can run, that they can support the owners of those businesses, it isn't really different than my overlying use. And I'd like you to just make that point. If you're going to bring new people in, I like your comment that bring in some new ideas for water, bring in some mitigation, buy out something that's using water, close it down, use the water for the people, whatever you want. But I don't really see that a business that the water district supplies is different from my business. Just want to say that.
Thanks, Pat. Okay, let's move to the next item. Sustainable management criteria, and we're on the second piece of that, the sustainable management criteria presentation itself. There it is. Okay, this is the first of the two presentations that we received this morning. Mid morning, came out around noon, I think. I sent it before I went to the TAC meeting to everybody. It was briefed for the first time at the TAC today by Steve Johnson, the Water Resource Manager, and Heather Steele, who was here in place of Jeff Helsley, and Nicole, and I've forgotten her last name, who is also works with Stetson on this. We'll have individual comments due on this. It recaps a lot of the information that has been presented and discussed at the last few meetings, piece by piece, to mention an approach that a couple folks have mentioned in the last half hour or so. This captures a lot of it written down, and it provides the basis for what they are going to be writing in the chapter on sustainable management criteria of the GSP. So our individual comments on this one, we need to get back to Stetson by the end of next week on the 13th. So I'm not going to brief this. I'm going to point out to a couple things that are policy considerations. This, again, was a presentation for the TAC. Most of us, this is the outline of the presentation, an overview of the criteria itself, the approach they are taking with setting it, the definition of undesirable results and clarification of that, a discussion of, and these are factors in the GSP, minimum thresholds and measurable objectives. And that gets into some of the very technical issues that the TAC took on today. These are the sustainable management criteria that they're looking at: reduction of groundwater storage, chronic lowering of groundwater levels, seawater intrusion, and these are really essentially right out of the right out of Sigma. Seawater intrusion, which is not a problem that we have in the basin. We have most of the others, and that's clarified later. Degraded water quality, land subsidence, and depletion of interconnected surface water. Here's the definition of the undesirable results: occurs when any of the 6 sustainability indicators becomes, quote, significant and unreasonable. The minimum thresholds are defined as the quantitative limit where exceedances produce undesirable results as defined in the bullet above. Interim milestones are those things in the GSP that are quantitative goals set in 5-year increments in the GSP at each representative monitoring site for where you're going to monitor in the basin. Measurable objectives are quantitative goals that reflect the desired groundwater conditions as defined in the GSP. The overall sustainability goal is a qualitative description of how the undesirable results in bullet number 1 are avoided and the basin is operated within its sustainable yield. The approach they took is the available water and storage is a significant consideration influencing the project and management actions that we'll see in the next section, and sustainable management criteria. Things to consider when defining the significant and unreasonable loss of storage were below. Groundwater resources are deemed the primary encroachment issue for the Navy NAWS Naval Air Weapons Station, China Lake, and so defined in an official letter that they sent to the Groundwater Authority and declared it as such. The cost to mitigate secondary impacts related to the loss of storage, shallow wells going dry, relocation of wells due to water quality issues, etc., close parent. Beneficial uses, that definition that we've all talked, or that has been discussed tonight. And there are still uncertainties within this, given what we know and don't know. The general basin and model uncertainties, although we're the most studied basin probably in the world, as was mentioned today at the TAC meeting, there are still uncertainties, and in fact, that's why we're the most studied. And the model itself, although a great deal of confidence was expressed in it today, there are some uncertainties in all models.
I'd like to interrupt you right there, David, and make a comment.
Okay, Judy?
The second bullet, under the second bullet, about it says quality issues, etc. They need to stop doing that. They need to be exact. If there's a list of 10 things they want to put down, they should put them all down. Which is why in my written correspondence with you all, I put they have something in, they're too vague. They have something in the other document that we looked at that said similar to. They need to be precise.
Thanks, Judy.
You're welcome.
Okay, future expansion of the Navy mission, potential major conflict, as we have seen, and big changes in the mission of the base have taken place over time, just in the time that I've been here. Climate change impacts, imported water availability and timeline. The model runs currently assume imported water is available in year 2035 and has checkpoints for where, if it is not available, alternative actions would be triggered. Impacts to groundwater dependent ecosystems, and during the discussions at the TAC today on that item, the similarity to dust mitigation, dust issues was brought into play as a part of that discussion. And it was also brought up that under Sigma, basins can define additional undesirable results, and that may be one to consider for the GSP. That comment was made today in the TAC. Okay, the undesirable results themselves, and these, what Steve was doing when he presented this with Heather, was defining the approach they're taking and what is, with the comments that are being made by both the TAC and the PAC, due next Friday. Reduction of groundwater storage. Criteria to establish when undesirable results occur, such as depletion of reserve usable groundwater or amount of shallow wells predicted to go dry. That's for that undesirable results. The second undesirable result was chronic lowering of groundwater levels. Two items there, criteria to establish when undesirable results occur, the amount of shallow wells predicted to go dry. The potential impacts identified were shallow wells need to be deepened or replaced, or the user, parent domestic well owner, would need to be connected to a water system, co-op, mutual system, alternative water. Those are two of the undesirable results. Continuing. Degraded water quality, criteria to establish when undesirable results occur. Beneficial uses are jeopardized. The impacts potentially, water user would need to be connected to a well from another area, similar to the impact of lowering level. Land subsidence, criteria to establish when an undesirable results occur. Water levels reach clay layers Potential impact, sensitive facility at the Naval Air Weapons Station would need to be replaced, repaired, or damaged infrastructure. And the point there was that there, in most places in the valley, there isn't a predicted negative impact to, unless it's very excessive, to subsidence, but there are known places on the installation where subsidence would cause a major impact to the mission and infrastructure. Number 3, or actually number 5, depletion of interconnected surface water, and that's still under evaluation. We don't have a lot of interconnected surface water in this basin. Surface water.
Actually, we have more than you think.
At certain times of year, yes.
All the canyon flows.
Yep. Okay, continuing with now we're into minimum thresholds. Reduction of groundwater storage, information or criteria used, the results of all modeling runs of the model, and the analysis of the shallow well impacts done separately in support of each model. The method of measurement, change of groundwater in storage, the Tyson polygon method. The basin, they divide it into discrete polygons, geographically drawn to represent the area close to each measurement point, defined as a monitoring well, a key well that they select as representative of that polygon. Change in groundwater calculated based on bulk hydrogeologic parameters and measured groundwater levels for each polygon. Second item, chronic lowering of groundwater levels. Information and criteria used, results from modeling scenario 6, and shallow well impact analysis. Method of measurement was the groundwater levels. Degraded water quality, information and criteria were the results of modeling run 6. Transport results were not available yet. DRI is in work on them. Those are the ones that were expected by the end of next week. The method of measurement is total dissolved solid concentrations. Land subsidence, information criteria used, DRI analysis of existing data, analysis of lithology and predicted water levels at key wells, method of measurements, groundwater levels as a proxy for those. And the last one was depletion of interconnected surface water, still under evaluation. This is the chart that summarizes it. The 4 columns there, if that writing is as small to you as it is to me. On the left-hand side are the sustainability indicators. Chronic lowering of groundwater levels is the first. Reduction of groundwater storage, seawater intrusion, degraded water quality, land subsidence, and depletion of interconnected surface water. The second vertical column is historic or current undesirable results. In order, they were yes, yes. Seawater intrusion was not applicable. Degraded water quality, yes. Land subsidence, no to date. Depletion of interconnected surface water, no. Third column was future undesirable results without GSP implementation, largely from the baseline model. First row was yes. Second row was yes. The saltwater, seawater intrusion, not applicable. Degraded water quality, yes. Land subsidence, yes. And depletion of interconnected surface water, undetermined. The last column are the proposed management action items, which we'll have in a separate brief that follows this item. But they were at the top for lowering of groundwater levels, the first row. Imported water, recycled water, water conservation, pumping limitations, pumping optimization, shallow well mitigation, and potentially brackish water project. The second column, second row, reduction of groundwater storage, imported water, recycled water, water conservation, pumping limitations, pumping optimization, shallow well mitigation, same as the list above, and potential brackish water project. All the same criteria for lowering of groundwater as you would expect. No, not applicable for seawater intrusion. Degraded water quality, we're talking groundwater GWL storage projects. Groundwater level storage projects? Okay, that's what I thought. Didn't make sense to me. Okay, that's the same for the last three: land subsidence and depletion of interconnected surface water. Even though it's undefined, we have the solution over there, groundwater level storage projects. Okay, and we'll get to the one or two of the last slides that relate to policy before we get into the technical pieces in depth. Okay, these are the sustainable management criteria approach summary. Can you all read that? Do I need to read through this? Okay, I apologize for reading through the previous one. But we're looking at the overall approach, the sustainability indicator, which we've mentioned the 6 of them, the significant and unreasonable results, the approaches, the results. The third column is the minimum draft threshold approach, and the fourth column is the measurable objective draft approach. And those two are specific in how you select it technically, also for the TAC. At this point, what they went on to do was to select or suggest a first set of candidate key wells that would fit in those polygons and be candidates to look at with regards to monitoring and checking each one of those minimum thresholds and objective results in determining the action points for the GSP. These I'm not going to go through these beyond this. I wanted to show you what they look like, what you're looking at, and this is TAC stuff. This is not our stuff. But you get to essentially, historically, is the jagged line in light blue that you see on the left side of the chart. The point at which the modeling continues is shown on this chart as a solid line without any jagged jumps to it, as to the groundwater level in this particular well, and how it reacts to the scenario over time, the dates across the bottom. The minimum threshold is that orange line at the bottom. The measurable objective is the higher line, and it gives a span of where you would, and indicators of where the allowable minimum threshold that would trigger actions if you went below that, and what your objective is in achieving. And each individual well is different. The TAC noted some wells might not be suitable for this purpose. There may be other key ones they put forward, but these were examples of what they were doing in terms of implementing this. If we go back to what the policy issues are, is it me? Apparently. What we need to do, we want to look through this whole thing and see, does this make sense to us as to how these are the key criteria, sustainable management criteria, that they have selected for the 6 items in Sigma that looks like Sigma identifies, and we're going to be addressing in the GA, in the GSP. And the policy issues essentially are around how in fact, overall, are we measuring properly in the basin? Is this as far as we want it to go? Some of the issues that have been addressed at the table tonight, users that would be eliminated or reduced or controlled, beneficial uses, all those kinds of things. And some of it, in fact, includes what Tom brought up with regards to new water users and how we adjust to them, fees, et cetera. Those are the kinds of policy issues that we can weigh in on. With regards to growth, there's severe limitations as to what Groundwater Authority actually has, because most of those authorities lay with the individual entities that serve on the board, not in the collective board itself. But overall, there are considerations there that can be in it. So what we're looking for is specific individual comments back on this approach for how the Groundwater Authority is going to measure and set sustainability management criteria. The tax role, the TAC has a role in this in trying to ensure that it's the most technically accurate, and they are putting together their comments on this, which are also due the end of next week individually. then they will be sending them back out like we do to everybody afterwards for consideration at the next TAC meeting. So I'm not going to go through any more on this. Are there comments folks want to make now prior to us doing our individual review, recognizing most folks have not seen it all gathered in one place like this until today?
Dave, I heard today, and this is getting into tax stuff too, but I heard it said, and I would like to say it again here. You know, we're talking minimum thresholds here. For most of the valley, that is, you know, the chronic lowering of groundwater levels. That's how, you know, that's your metric. That's what you use to monitor all that. Except there are areas, North Brown Road, namely, is it's going to be a water quality problem because they already have a water quality problem, and so somehow that needs to be factored in to do minimum thresholds for those areas, and that's beyond my pay grade, and that's something the TAC and the Stetson needs to be looking at too, is how are you going to do both, but to establish minimum thresholds for various. But water quality is going to be an issue, I believe, and it will be in the future an issue. Judy a while ago mentioned the Bureau of Rec wells. That one you had up there just a minute ago, Bureau of Rec 3, that's on Bowman Road, and that's just between 395 and the landfill. Now, that sucker is known to have really, really bad water down at the bottom of it. And that is in, they say southeast, but that is in the, you know, that's kind of like the south, that's where by my house. And I'm in a good water quality area. And once the water table keeps going down, we keep pumping, you know, we're all going to be suffering from poor quality water. It isn't going to matter, you know. And so that's just like to say that. I got some.
Agreed. No, I agree, Lyle. And I just showed, displaying slide number 9, which has the degraded water quality, and it's where I mentioned the method of measurement was the total dissolved solid concentrations, and that's the model that is running right now. DRI is completing it, and it's anticipated that it'll be available by the end of next week.
Yeah,
and that will help them set the thresholds because there are established guidelines with regards to TDS concentration levels and what that does to
how bad the water is and
water
still
quality.
Be potable.
Right.
Okay.
Hey, David, can I mention something? You know, like Lyle's mentioning, you know, we look at the minimum threshold. This reminds me of work, you know, I've done on with water rights is, you know, what's the sufficient amount as opposed to the minimum amount? And maybe we want to kind of raise the bar so that, you know, the policy or the goal here is not just to stay above the minimum, but to stay more in the green zone.
Yeah, that's the objective.
Okay.
That's what that objective number is.
Yeah,
the green zone, to use your terminology.
To second that, you know, if you allow yourself to fall down to the minimum, you may never build it back up to the permissible zone, to the sufficient zone. It might not be like the level of a well. The quality may not come back once it's gone down. And there's something else to recall in groundwater quality as well, is if it starts taking out domestic wells, it will probably take out wells, there'll be clusters of wells. It won't just take out Lyle's well and not the well down the street from him. And so the impact could really compound, I think, if we don't really manage the groundwater quality in the shallow wells.
Right. And in areas that are directly west of town, where there are lots of domestic de minimis wells, it would be fairly easy for those wells to connect to the water district. But what are you going to do with this is something that is going to have to be thought about by the GA board and the TAC and the PAC. What about the North Brown Road area? There are lots and lots of domestic wells there. They're either single domestic wells or they're like somebody had 10 acres, divided it into 4 2.5s, and they have a well for 4 of them. We have observed an increasing number of people hauling water north on North Brown Road. Don knows of a situation where they were either a large co-op or a mutual. The people wouldn't join together and do what they should have done to fix their system. Now they're all hauling water. Maybe some of them have a private well. But if you look at the North Brown Road area, if you go up, say, to the Lee Lighter area, I don't know how many miles that is from 178, but the closest public entity is the Inyo Kern CSD. I mean, what are we talking about? 10 miles of pipe to even get to the people from the Inyo Kern CSD, not to mention the cost of the distribution system. It's not a simple, straightforward solution to a potential future problem. And I don't think it's a future problem. Actually, I think it's an existing problem. I think that in that area, the thing that is happening first is a decline in water quality. Well, I know it's happening, as well as water level drops. But as I said this afternoon, over time, the state and federal government has issued more and more regulations about drinking water. And if you're a mutual, you are supposed to abide by those. I don't know what the cutoff is, but I mean, that's the reason the water district is treating for arsenic. The water hasn't changed particularly, the quality of the water. It was the rules that changed dramatically.
Thanks, Judy. Other committee comments? Camille?
I just have one comment, mainly about the minimum thresholds and the measurable objectives in this particular criteria. They're all based on scenario 6. We've been told multiple times that they haven't decided upon a scenario, which is fine. And they're using scenario 6 to develop the minimum thresholds and measurable objectives. My question has to do with if they later at some point abandon scenario 6 or something, are they going to have to go back and recalculate all those? Or for the purposes of formulating the minimum thresholds, does it not really matter? And that may be more of a technical question, but I didn't hear anybody ask it at the TAC this morning.
Yeah, it is, and if you heard Steve's opening summary of how they looked at the whole thing, the Groundwater Authority is looking at the opposite sides that are, and opinions that are represented in the valley with regards to we're already in overdraft and we're at the minimum thresholds versus the impacts to mining.
Right, I understand that.
Yeah.
I would hate to have to go back to the drawing board and redo your minimum thresholds
Right.
and everything. It just seems like the order of things is maybe slightly off. I understand we're pressed for time.
No,
But since they state that that's what they're using as opposed to some other measurement like historical data or something like that, as it is, a number of the wells, it looks like they might have to throw out of the data set. And so I would hope that they would be able to replace those with other wells, although they didn't state that either. So.
Yeah, I thought I did hear that, but I agree with you. Where I was leading to was it looks like the basin numbers for how much reserve water they wanted to take out of the basin from the whole briefing with Steve and Heather giving it was that the levels that were achieved in scenario 6 are what they consider the max. And that bottom of the model line also lines up, as was briefed today, in the scenario in each one of the wells with the historical records also. There was a lot of discussion about should the objective be there or not.
They forced that in the model. They forced the historical to equal. So that wasn't actually model driven. that was when they realized the model numbers didn't match the historical numbers. They did an adjustment.
There was discussion about that, and I imagine Don's about to bring that up.
I'll be really brief, David. As far as the present establishment of minimum thresholds using the model, there are clearly some concern about it. I think there's probably at least 3 of us on the TAC who don't agree with that approach. And there's another way to do it, which is actually quite simple and is using the historical data directly. You simply extrapolate the declines that we have observed out to whatever period that you choose. It's the end of pumping time is when that year limit is reached. That's your extrapolation. You read off the water level decline, and that becomes your minimum threshold for that particular well. And for most wells, the difference between the minimum threshold and a well-established final level is about 10 feet. Some wells that have peculiar behavior will greatly benefit by doing what I just described. It's simpler and it is not model dependent. You still use the model to give you a glimpse into the future. It's not that the model is not being used, but it's not being used in the way that has been described. I think that's where we will end up.
Thank you, Don. Other comments from the committee? Public comments? Other public comments? Okay, with that, let's our task again. I'm sorry. Oh, Elaine, okay.
I'm sorry, I was a little slow getting up.
That's okay.
I have a question for Judy, if I may. The people that and mutuals that you say are needing to haul water, I would appreciate it, and I'm sure that this committee, as well as the TAC and the GA, if you could have them come to these meetings and explain what the situation is. Because if they were here in person rather than secondhand, they might be able to get the TAC, the PAC, and the GA to incorporate some kind of help mechanism within the GSA that would create a solution for them. They wouldn't be bearing that on their own. Thank you.
That's a very nice idea. As you know, Don, as the president of the Domestic Well Owners Association, and he has sent out multiple emails to well owners, both domestic, private well owners, mutuals, and co-ops. And you see who's here.
Then I would say they're not worried about their problem. Thank you.
Another partial answer. We fully expect that the GSA will have remediation for any wells that fail to specific causes having to do with groundwater quality or groundwater lowering after the adoption of the GSP. So your comment about if they were here they could get remediation, remediation is something which we fully expect will be part of the GSP.
I didn't bring up the illustration that I offered for the well owners per se. I brought it up for the issue of the declining water quality level And when that kind of thing begins in a desert basin, I'm not a technical person, but I have observed many things, it doesn't stop. It continues. And the GA board, the county, I don't know where the ball will fall, is going to have to think about the issue and think of a means to address it. It's not, and it says in one of these documents that we received today, something about, areas where water quality declines or water levels decline, will have to look at, and Jeff Helmsley has said it before, hooking up to a larger water system. That's easy to say. It's not easy to do, was the reason I brought it up.
Thank you, Judy. Any other comment? Pat?
I do. So Lyle had brought up, another kind of clouded policy issue of, is it the policy of this plan to assist well users with remediation if they meet certain criteria? And maybe I'm new, but I just wanted to clarify, because he didn't say that directly, but I see that as a policy issue.
Yeah, there is, and this group has been tasked to address that in the past, and we provided some information at the first level on it. And to my knowledge, it is going to be in the GSP. Don, is that correct? Yeah. Thank you. Okay. All right. With that, let's move to item number C. 4C, projects and management actions. And much like the last brief, most of these items have been discussed piecemeal over the last year and a half or two. This will be the first time you'll see them all together. And like the last brief, this also supports a section in draft in the GSP, and will also be due for our comments by the end of next week, individually to me and then to Stetson. I'll forward to Stetson. Okay, so projects and management actions. I'm not going to read through this whole thing since you can read these, but it does talk about imported water, and we'll spend a little bit on that slide because there's information some may not have seen. It talks about recycled water, pumping restrictions, conservation, and the brackish water project. These are management actions that revolve around those items that will go into the GSP. So there are planned projects and management actions, the 4 that are listed there, and there are potential projects and management actions that, as more data comes in and more information, they're intended to be worked in, if not available in time for the plan, at the 5-year or interim review opportunities in the GSP itself after the first implementation begins. So under that, we have, of course, the brackish water and other projects proposed during the horizon. Goals for the projects and management actions are, as you see, and there's mitigation in there. Tom referenced your point on the last one. GSP discussion of project and management actions includes all of those. These are the things that are going to be in the GSP itself regarding each one of these management actions. 2 potential options for imported water, that's a big one in this valley, and it is part of the initial plan. 2 potential options for delivery mechanisms, LADWP, which was talked about extensively at the last GA meeting, and actually a few before that. Option 2, partnership with AVEC, and what each one of those takes. What's involved in the following slides is actually a first cut pricing out of what that is and what the impact might be in acre feet per water cost. Both require purchase of external water rights that you would wheel, and then the delivery mechanism is one of those 2 options above, either out of the aqueduct directly and wheeled water is exchanged with LA, so no more is pumped from Inyo than they would have pumped before. They'd be pumping less from Inyo that would be used by LA. What came to us would be supplemented by what we purchased elsewhere, State Water Project or other folks. Those on the bottom are some of the opportunities that have been identified by our water marketer agent. Again, these are a little bit more details than may have been seen before about option 1 out of the aqueduct, option 2 out of Antelope Valley, East Kern, booster pump station, storage tank. These are the things that would have to be constructed that goes into the costs which follow. And the important things to note here to get an idea on what you're looking at is this is if no grant fees are available for the infrastructure, this is what cost per acre foot might be. The last 2 columns are the cost per acre foot if it was a 4% loan that we achieved to get the infrastructure funded. The last column is a 2% loan for infrastructure development cost, what those acre feet would cost. And what you're seeing and going to see on the subsequent slides is water is almost, not quite, but almost doubled per acre foot coming out of AVEC versus LADWP if we were able to make that a win-win between our basin, Inyo County, and DWP.
I have a comment. While the AVAC is far more expensive, if we built a pipeline, it would be ours, and we wouldn't have to worry about any future negotiations with DWP.
Thank you. This is if grant fees are available to cover half of the cost.
I'm sorry, I do have my microphone on. What I said was one needs to consider with the AVEC project, building the pipeline from California City to the Indian Wells Valley. The pipeline would be ours. It would not be subject to future negotiations with DWP.
Okay, what I wanted to point out on this slide is the last slide, the numbers, everything else is the same, except in this case, we get grants for half of the infrastructure development cost. And the cost per acre feet goes down the same for each, but you still notice there's roughly one cost for AVEC versus LADWP. The last 2 columns, again, are whether you get a 4% loan or a 2% loan, best case. Recycled water.
I got a question. I guess we both have a question. Okay. Is there a way that we can compare these numbers with the current water costs for this valley? I mean, what does $1,700 per acre foot translate to in terms of our current water bills?
Well, I think the water district can tell you what it is for their users. What's the current cost of acre foot, water per acre foot?
Based on 2007, I think it's 2018-19 costs, it was $187 an acre foot, but it varies from year to year depending on our costs. It's been as high as $305 an acre foot.
But we're looking at a factor of 10 in terms of the cost of imported water versus the cost to you to pump water out of the ground and serve.
Right.
Okay. So it's a very big number is, I guess, the answer.
I had a question also. Basically, my question has to do with which one of these numbers includes the cost of just the water alone, not the infrastructure, not the acquisition cost. Would it be under O&M or is it the service costs? I'm unclear.
Let me say something here before we go any further, that I can help to clarify this. These costs that are listed here per acre foot are for a quantity of 5,000 acre feet of water. That's a very important thing to realize. So,
is that the cost of the water itself?
No.
So that's basically right.
You're,
So my
you're
question
retiring.
is,
You're retiring the capital cost in that water.
right. I'm curious to see what the cost of an actual acre foot of water
Well,
would
that's,
be, of which we're going to
Yeah.
theoretically have 5,000 of them.
that's not on this chart, however.
So this chart is
changes-
just capital, O&M, and fees.
I don't know that that's true.
No,
I
it
think is.
includes the cost of water also.
Yeah, it does. That's
But
what I
that's,
think.
the cost per se is not listed on this chart. It's
No, and
incorporated in that.
But it was an average based on what the water marketers had been able to locate this year, essentially, as opportunities.
The cost of water, imported water, wherever you get it, varies on the demand and the amount of water available to import. So,
Camille, if I could shine a little light onto it, I think that when you look at the one-time water supplies acquisition cost column of about $48 million, I believe what they're doing in here is they're acquiring long-term state entitlement to water, which is a one-time purchase. You actually don't buy the acre foot on an annual basis. You actually buy a entitlement from the state, and that's a already set up amount that's throughout the state, and then it's bought and sold by people, kind of like an annual pie that gets cut up. So you're buying that as a long-term permanent entitlement for about $50 million. What changes year to year is the amount of water that gets. You never get 100%, usually unless in a wet year. So normally they have like an average of about 50%. So normally if, let's say, you wanted to get 10 acre feet a year, you'd go out and buy 20. And so kind of in your head, you go each acre foot of long-term permanent entitlements kind of gets you a half acre foot of permanent actual use. But that's going to vary year to year. And then you use usually like a water bank or something as your as your checking account, where in a big wet year you may deposit a lot, and then in a drier you take some out. But so that's why I don't think there's an annual water cost, because you're actually not buying spot water year to year. You're actually buying a state entitlement of water.
Yeah, it isn't just the state entitlement, though. There are also individual sellers that have some opportunities. Some of them they're out of their state water rights, though.
Yeah, and so because we buy water a lot over in the Central Valley, and so we buy water some years where it's literally someone will have something like a state contract, and if they have excess or in a really dry year, the little bit that they get's worth a ton of money. So sometimes it doesn't make sense to farm. Sometimes they sell that water on the open market. And so that's kind of what we call spot water. And then there's entitlement water that a lot of time comes with land. And what people have done over time is the water's worth more to sell it than to farm. And so sometimes they just actually market the water, and that they'll kind of strip it from the land and sell it to other people.
Right. So. And I know what Capital Corps researched in the case of, while they were doing this, was both spot market and annual large scale. And they do vary over time, and it's also very much dependent on, what, as you mentioned, whether it's a wet year or a dry year, and that's why that's one of the advantages to a longer-term market. Yeah. Okay, what I'd suggest, let's go through the rest of these fairly quickly. Then we'll save questions for the end, and remember that this is an item that we have for discussion and individual input. Written input by next Friday as well to me, and I'll forward to Stetson. Okay, recycled water is another one, and we're going to get the same numbers associated out of this. There are two different kinds that they were looked at in the project: non-potable and indirect potable reuse. And you can see, I won't read the slide to you. This is an example of where the water infrastructure would be for purple. The purple pipelines represent recycled water projects itself to deliver to those areas that would be using the recycled water. And you see in one case you're looking at Cerro Coso down there on the far south side, out towards the fairgrounds, et cetera, out there on the east side. And I'm not sure what the injection site is out there to the west. Up north, it goes all the way out to the base, and where they're already using some recycled water on the golf course today, and also for the Tui chub, endangered species. invasive endangered species that was brought into our valley, which now we own. The care and feeding of it. It's free. Yeah. Thank you, Don. It costs us a lot of water to do
And money.
that. So new infrastructure would be required, as was displayed, for example, on that last slide. This is a listing of what that might be. Here's the same cost type comparison that was prepared for the imported water, presented for recycled water costs. And again, the two columns on the right-hand side are at 4% and 2% loans. This first slide, again, is no grant fees. So this is, we pay it out with those two loans. The three projects are irrigation overall, Saracoso use, and then recharge the aquifer. And so you're looking at the costs on the right side. Here is if 50% of the capital costs of infrastructure were from a grant, here's the reduction in what those fees would be for comparison with the imported water. And again, there is not necessarily one solution being considered. All of these are planned to go in the GSP. Pumping restrictions was another management action implemented after verifying current pumping and considering basin reasonable beneficial uses. Assumptions and specific plans are under consideration. There is still no, although they use Model 6 as a setting for where is the floor, where is those minimum thresholds, there is not yet their options for pumping restrictions are still under consideration. Dust mitigation control options are a part of this, need to be applied, and there was a good discussion today in the TAC about whether water should be used for that or other options, and should we allocate it. There are waterless options as well that would probably be something we'd want to consider in this basin. Historical conservation methods that have been done to date in this basin. Overall, there's a listing of some of them. Some are quite substantial. Opportunities for additional conservation. You can take a look at those. There's a number of items in this case for all three categories: municipal, residential, agriculture, and industries. Brackish Water Project itself, which I think the models are still being meshed and completed. And it was for incorporation in one of those review points in the GSP. So they went on to a great technical discussion. Our task before us, after we have a little bit of discussion on it here, is to go put our individual thoughts down on paper or on cyber paper and get them to me by next Friday. So comments, questions from the committee?
I have a question. On the recycled water, it seems like every time recycled water is mentioned, there's a different amount. In this particular one, they're saying that the annual water demand is 1,476 acre-feet. My question is that the supply, or is that just a demand that they calculated? Is it based on a particular supply of recycled water?
I don't know. Don, do you have? Don, not Don Decker. I was asking Don Zadiba, the general manager. Do you know where they got that number? I don't. It wasn't discussed today.
That's water available.
It's water available,
Yeah, I
1,400?
think that's less than the total that's produced, so I think it's just what's available, because there are commitments for some of that water, if I'm not
Right, it
mistaken.
just, going back over the history of all the recycled watered slides, that sort of things, every number is different. So I just wanted to find out, is that the amount that we think is available right now?
It's the water available.
Okay.
The reason that the numbers have bounced around is because different assumptions were made about what sort of treatment might be available, for example, and how the water would be used. So it gets complicated looking if you don't have the background that goes along with the number.
Other committee comments? Public comment?
Stan Rotora. I'm speaking on behalf of myself only. In fact, I was going to comment on the quantity of water, recycled water, one of my first comments. I've been keeping up to speed on what's going on at the wastewater treatment plant for the last 10 years. And the last time I calculated it, there was about 1,900 acre-feet of effluent going through the plant. Now, it gets confusing, that's for sure. My understanding is that the current Navy contract requires the city to give the Navy up to 750 acre-feet per year for the golf course, although they normally use closer to 500. And then there's the Tui Chub that my understanding is uses more than the golf course, and that could be anywhere from 700 to 850 acre-feet a year. So there's quite a bit of uncertainty there. But the number, the effluent that goes through the plant is about 1,900 acre-feet a year. The second comment on the recycled water is that the state revolving fund has very low-cost loans at 1%, not 2%. 2% is if for non-recycled water. So the wastewater plant, when we go to build a new wastewater plant, and you get through to the tertiary, the secondary, that's 2%. But anything beyond the secondary should be classified as recycled and should be 1%. So most of this that we're talking about now ought to be a 1% loan. Not that the difference between 1% and 2% makes a big deal of difference. We ought to be using the right number. One of the things that we don't discuss in any of this is where the money's coming from. We talk about the cost to the Groundwater Authority, and I haven't had time to go through any of these numbers to compare them with any past numbers, but the issue is twofold. How much is it going to cost? Then where's the revenue to pay for it going to come from? And that's something I think that the GSP has to say. You can't just say it's going to cost $60 million or $80 million or $150 million. You got to say, where am I getting the money? Bottom line. So I think there's still some work to do here. Thank you.
Thanks, Stan.
Can I ask Stan, can I ask a question? How much water does the city use on that affluent that they put on the hayfield that they pump water for?
It's 33 acres, and my understanding is like 8 to 10 acre-feet a year. So we're talking, 300 to 400 acre-feet a year. And that was done because Lahontan Water District required us to recycle water. So we're basically recycling water on that alfalfa field and losing $20,000 a year recycling water. I mean, it didn't make any sense when we did it. Everybody knew it didn't make any sense. We just spent $200,000 on a new baling machine. So we're losing money every year. We're not really, in my mind, that's not recycling. We're losing money. Recycling is when you use it and you save something, including money.
Yeah, wouldn't that water be put to a better use if it was used in the cemetery or something?
I believe that there's no intention of continuing the use of that water on that alfalfa field. As a matter of fact, I believe the city would love to get rid of it. But for now, I mean, it's either let it go to a pond and evaporate, or put it on the alfalfa field. And we have a contract with Lahontan that says you got to recycle it. So
how come it can't be better used at the fairgrounds or the cemetery?
It turns out that we would have to go through additional treatment of what we got to have now. My understanding is it's just secondary treated water that we put on the alfalfa field, and because it's fed to some, if it were, you couldn't put it on a plant and then eat the plant, but you can put it in hay, have the cow eat the hay, and then you can eat the cow, but you can't directly use that water on something that you're going to eat. So Yeah, it's a waste of time, it's a waste of money, and I believe their every intention is to get rid of that alfalfa field.
Thanks, Ted. Other public comment?
Might be cheaper to retreat that water than it would be to buy a new baler.
Hello again, Derek Hoffman, attorney from Meadowbrook. I have a lot of questions and comments, but I'll just offer a couple tonight. David, could you please go to the imported water costs slide?
Which one?
I believe it's 7. Thank you.
That's with grant fees covering half.
Oh, come back one more, please. Thank you.
That's no grant fees.
Okay, thank you. So I agree with Stan that one of the big questions is what's the source of funding for all of these costs, whether it's imported, recycled, et cetera. And I think the slides earlier indicated that the funding strategy should be and probably will be identified in the GSP, but right now it's not identified. And David, I wanted to point out, too, you're doing a fine job pinch hitting for Stetson engineers tonight because you're presenting technical information. So some of my questions may not be answered tonight. I just posed them for you all to consider. But I would think that the PAC would want to know who will fund these costs. I would think you'd definitely want to know that. And under model scenario 6, as I mentioned earlier, one of the pieces of that is that the so-called non-domestic group is forced to go away. And so if Searles Valley and Meadowbrook, other large ag and all ag is gone at some point under that scenario, and if the Navy is deemed exempt, then who's left? And I think that's something you ought to be thinking about. You know, who will fund this bill for imported water? And it's a rhetorical question tonight. It's one I hope you will consider. And another comment and also a question for you to consider is why is the number 5,000 acre feet? And who determined that 5,000 is the number? It might be the number, but maybe there's a different number that might make more sense. And you might want to consider whether 10,000 acre feet is a better option or 15,000 acre feet. And evaluate the comparative costs for different options and where that water might be used, how it might be used, who might pay for it, what are the different options in considering these questions. Because right now I think what you're being presented with is a model scenario for which a lot of thought was put into it, but we still don't know all the assumptions behind that. And some of these factors that you're now being asked to consider are based upon that same scenario. And I think there are a whole lot of other options and a range of options and questions that need to be answered, you know, before you can make a real good policy determination on some of them. So again, these are just questions for you to think about. I know we've been invited to give individual comments, and I expect we will do that. But I think these are some pretty big questions that you ought to be thinking about as well.
Thanks, Dirk. Any other public comment? Okay, with that, draft section 2 went out to members earlier this week. I have one individual comment submission to date from Don Zadiba that will be forwarded, and the rest of us have a task. That isn't due till the 17th because that section is in fact written. The date on the 13th is the things that they're going to be working on in between that, which are the previous 2 items that we've gone about. So with respect to draft section 2 release or comment, are there comments folks want to make at this point prior to our individual written submissions electronic to me? Committee?
I just kind of cursory read through section 2, and I thought it looks pretty complete. I had a couple questions about things that I'll write, you know, but I thought it looked pretty complete, and a lot of work went into it. A lot of research work went into it. So that was kind of my take on it, and just sort of a read through it once. So.
Thank you, Lyle. Nick?
I might second what Lyle said. I did a more than cursory review. The second time through, I didn't find anything new or different from the first time through. And I don't have a single comment at this point. I was pretty impressed.
Thank you. Public comment? Okay, having seen none, we're up at agenda item number 5, imported water update. I received nothing or a report of nothing new beyond what was reported at the last Groundwater Authority meeting from the staff this morning. And Don, do you have anything additional to add or not on that?
No, there's really nothing significant to report. As a result, Capital Corps is not planning to be at the Groundwater Authority meeting this month, but they will be in October, and I anticipate they'll have something much more significant to report.
Yeah, I know. They are making another round of Washington visits, and we've been working with them, so, okay. Thank you. Any comments on this item? Mayor, did you want to make a comment? Not right yet. Okay. All right. With that, we'll move to item number 6. Future agenda items. You see the 3 listed there. We will add, on the basis of what happened today, we'll have our collective review under the GSP update and review of the sustainable management criteria and the projects and management actions sections that we just went through. Plus, we'll have section 2, second review or review of our individual comments, and we may have new sections of the GSP itself draft on there. Most of that will be wrapped up under number A. We expect those others. Did anyone else see any additional items for future agenda items for October? Okay. Then we go to number 7. Future PAC meeting dates. The next 3 dates are set. October 3rd, November 7th, December 5th. I don't see yet, although that we could have one, a need for a special meeting might approach, given the timeline compression at some point if we get dropped on us a number of sections all at once to review. Much like last month, we might not be able to do it all in one meeting. So hopefully we'll not have that happen, but I expect we're going to be very busy at these next 3 meetings. With that, we're at number 8, member comment, individual member comment. Let's start with Ed, if you're still there. Ed Imsen.
Yes, I am, and I have some general thoughts and comments.
Ed, you're really garbled.
Thanks for letting. Well, I'm trying to speak as close to the phone as I can get. Did that help?
That helped a lot.
Okay. I just have some general comments. The first is I'm still optimistic that we can solve this thing and include most of the stakeholders and come up with a solution. And I also feel that this whole process has been driven by some people that have their own agendas, and I think they are trying to make it look more dramatically bad than it really is. For example, we're not using the USGS number for recharge. This impacted well study is based on not actual total data that these 91 wells have failed. I see this throughout the whole process, and it makes me wonder, why is there someone trying to use the worst possible numbers and make it more dramatic? The last thing I see is the water quality issue. The Navy and the Water District are thinking of trying to move and shift some pumping to North Brown Road, and I can tell you that our water quality for the last 20 years has been pretty similar. It hasn't changed that much. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Tim, we'll start at your end.
None.
None.
I would just like to emphasize that in doing a GSP, we need to be realistic. And we need to not have things in there that cannot be enforced. This is in the written document that I wrote. I am really concerned about that. Some of the papers we have had have talked about issues that would have to be enforced. How are you going to know, for instance, if someone is using more than 2 acre-feet or not? We have a board that has no staff. They have a borrowed staff. Right now it's the water district. Next year it will be the county. So I think when we make comments, we need to make sure that that the board is going to be guided and that the Stetson is going to be guided to write things that can be realistic and can be enforced. Otherwise, why do it?
Well, I have to agree with what Judy said about enforcement. Probably the number one feedback I get from private well owners that I happen to know, they have no intention of registering a well without a very, very good reason. And their general comment is, well, they can't do anything about it anyway. They can't enforce it. There's no enforcement for that, and there's no benefit for that they can see. If we want them to understand that we need this data, then we have to cover those comments that people are making. Otherwise, the only people they're going to report are people that are already engaged, like Lyle Fisher, Wes Katzenstein, whoever else, myself, Judy. We probably all registered. I know I did. The other comment that I want to make is that whether my business happens to be in the county or within the city limits, it's still a business that benefits this area. I still pay taxes here. I still employ people. I still buy things that need to be bought, so I support other businesses in this area. I don't appreciate being hammered on about being a farm because, frankly, if I bought water from the water district and I wasn't a farm, I would be in the favored group with the city people. Now, it seems a little unfair. I can stop pumping water, and maybe it would affect Judy, and it might affect my near neighbors. But how long, if it does affect them, how long until Cyril's Valley affects them or the water district or somebody else? I don't know. And nobody knows. But we have a cast of characters here where we are villainizing certain entities. I think we need to get over that. And I think favoritism on whether you're in the city or in the white district out there in the county, I think we need to get past this. I'm done.
Thanks, Pat. Josh?
I don't know if you guys follow the news or are on Twitter lately, but it's too bad we can't take a Sharpie and just add more recharge to our area. So, thanks.
Thanks. Renee?
My only comment is I want to keep working towards getting this GSP completed as soon as possible. Thank you.
Go ahead, Nick. I'm sorry.
Thank you. This afternoon, about 3 o'clock, I went to the GA website and found a very pleasant surprise. It was a multi-page submission from Mr. Katzenstein that presented, and I hope I'm not stealing your thunder, Wes. I'll be brief in case you are going to comment on that. Takes a uses-based approach to management of groundwater in our basin. And that got my attention because it's an idea I have long championed. And I have in front of me 2 pages from the Department of Water Resources Water Budget Best Management Practices. And I noted in here on page 6 and 7, general water budget uses, they have 9 different bullets. The second one is identify the primary beneficial uses and users of water and determine which water budget components are most critical to the area. And Mr. Katzenstein does that. But here's the part that got my attention. On all of these 9 bullets, there's only 2 words italicized: beneficial uses. And that's exactly what Mr. Katzenstein does, and he relates it to users. But the focus is not on who is pumping or how much they're pumping, but how those people actually use the water they pump. And he arrives at a very, in my mind, reasoned approach to the management of groundwater in this basin. And I commend it to your reading. Thank you.
Thanks, Wes.
Well, I'm pleased to hear that the article made it to the website. Thank you. Yes, this is in the last Groundwater Authority meeting, Steve Johnson basically off the cuff invited input from the community on, I think it was the management scenarios, and I've been kind of playing with this idea for some time, so I took him at his word and kind of finalized some thoughts I've had and provided that document today about noon electronically to Don Zadiva and Steve Johnson and a few others, and apparently it made it to the website, so that's great. But I'll be very short here. The document is called Use-Based Allocation of Groundwater in IWV Groundwater Basin. My goal is to allocate groundwater based on uses of groundwater that realize the most reasonable usage of the basin's groundwater resource and treat all users symmetrically. So anyway, this is now available for you to look at, and the word reasonable use of groundwater is in the state constitution. It needs to be reasonable, and what I did is define what I think is a useful definition of what reasonable, how to assess reasonable use in this basin. And what I came up with is the number of livelihoods that each acre foot of water protects and the amount of existing infrastructure that is protected by each acre foot of water pumped. And anyway, that document is apparently available, and I hope there's some ideas in there that prove useful. Thank you.
Thanks.
I don't have anything more, but I would like to notice what Pat said. She confirmed, I think, what I said last month about the mandatory well registration, that I don't expect too much response to it, and I think Pat just confirmed it. Will I register my well? Yeah, probably. You notice a pregnant pause there. Yeah, I probably will. But it already is, because Stetson already has all the numbers for it anyhow. So, but anyhow, yeah, I will probably register mine. But I don't think the response is going to be too big.
Okay. John? Don? Tom? Okay, I'd like to close by just thanking folks. I'd like to thank Stetson. I also think they did a good job on Section 2. I didn't find much to throw any rocks at, and I noticed Don had a couple good corrections and additions mostly that I thought did pretty well with it. So I think they're on track. It was a better submission than I actually thought it would be, and it wasn't because I thought it was going to set a low bar. I expected a good one, but it was even better. So they're working that hard, and they've had a number of challenges thrown at them procedurally and health-wise. Jeff is just the latest. I'd like to thank everybody in attendance and dedication to doing this, and most of all, working together collectively, collaboratively, respectfully, now that we're really into the toughest issues, that relationship that we've all established over the last year and a half is where the fruit is going to come in us working this together. And remember that when we get a little angry with each other, perhaps sometimes, I think we're doing pretty well. Let's keep it up. I'm happy with the way we're working this. We have a lot on our plate coming up the next 3 meetings, I think. So with that, any other last comments for anybody? Okay, let's adjourn for the evening then. Thank you very much.